and ministry says government is working with relief organizations to address humanitarian challenges. A very warm welcome to Addis News Hour. I'm Solomon Danye. Thanks for joining me. Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed has called on Ethiopians to donate blood to the members of the National Defense Force of Ethiopia. He made the call while he was donating blood to the armed forces. He has also called on Ethiopians to contribute to the National Great Legacy Initiative. Ethiopia, donate blood for the armed forces, renovate the homes of those in need, plant your Great Legacy print, double down on agriculture productivity. When we each do our part, the whole comes together, the Premier has said. Office of the Prime Minister dismisses accusations of intentionally blocking aid routes and imposing bureaucratic procedures to prevent unfettered access to the state of Tigray. In its weekly press briefing, the office also indicts the TPLF of using economic sabotage and disseminating false propaganda to terrorize the people of Ethiopia and mislead the international community. Though the government witnesses displacements and encroachments in the states of Amhara and Afar the office denies the advancement of TPLF forces to the town of Waldia in the state of Amhara. We have more in this story.
Together with their operatives, they have orchestrated economic sabotage through which there has been a hoarding of iron estimated by the federal police to be worth 5 billion. And they continue to use their operatives abroad to disseminate false propaganda online, attempting to incite fear about the country while influencing ill-informed policymakers with a distorted narrative.
The government of Ethiopia has been accusing the TPLF of launching attacks against the Amhara and Afar states to obstruct delivery of humanitarian aid. Some international organizations and governments, on the contrary, blamed the government for forbidding unfettered access to aid organizations. Briefing journalists Thursday, Press Secretary Bilene Seyum dismisses the accusation as baseless.
The other problematic framing which is being concocted is that the Tigray region is under a siege or a blockade by the government. And this framing is also why the TPLF waged a confrontation on the Afar entry point for humanitarian assistance. And this has been done to give the impression that the government is blocking humanitarian assistance throughout that route, thereby facilitating the demands for the opening up of other routes that in a way would be treated as a no man's land and entry point. Fortunately, as a sovereign nation, the Ethiopian government determines which route is more suitable to deliver its responsibility of humanitarian assistance. And those who want corridors for weapons and non-humanitarian goods to be routed to them continue to try and manipulate the realities on the ground in attempts to convince the world that unfettered access is not happening.
The press secretary indicts the TPLF of insurgency, but she denies reports of the TPLF forces advancing far from where they were supposed to be kept.
You talk about advancements and TPLF taking hold of certain parts of the Amhara region, Waldia and whatsoever. And I think it's important here again, which I was referring to earlier on in terms of characteristics and manifestations of terrorism, because there is overt terrorism, which is provocations. You go with the gun, you terrorize people in that way, you loot properties. The other form of terrorism is the psychological terrorism, which is giving the impression that you're bigger than what you are and seeding doubts within communities to give them the impression that there is something threatening that is coming towards them. The information that I have with regards to Waldia is that there is no such threat at this point in time from the TPLF.
The press secretary on her weekly briefing reproached the international media for their misuse of phrases and words of government leaders to blow things out of proportion.
They have misconstrued the statements that have been made by the leadership as directed towards the people of Tigray. So words used by the leadership are being pulled out of context to fit an agenda that rings the sirens of dehumanizing rhetoric that has been referred to. And it's very clear to those that read these statements and to those that push the alarm that such statements are directed at the TPLF organization as a terrorist organization rather than the people of Tigray. So let's not also forget in this regard that both former President Obama and Vice President John Kerry have used similar terminology and phrases in the threat posed by ISIL as a terrorist organization.
The press secretary pointed out that more than 300,000 people have been displaced from the states of Amhara and Afar because of continued encroachments of the TPLF. Ministry of Foreign Affairs says government is committed to work with relief organizations to address humanitarian challenges. Ministry spokesperson Dina Mufti told ETV English that pertinent government officials had a constructive discussion with USAID administrator during her stay in Ethiopia. Kasan Jane reports.
The terrorist TPLF is being engaged in provocative acts in various parts of neighboring Amhara and Afar regions and disrupting the delivery of humanitarian aid to Tigray. In an exclusive interview with the TV English spokesperson of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Ethiopia, Ambassador Dina said pertinent government officials had a constructive discussion with USAID Administrator Samantha Power, who has arrived in Ethiopia on Wednesday. Power held talks with high government officials concerning access to humanitarian support to Tigray. Dina briefed TV.
There was a visit of Madam Samantha Power, the USAID Director to Ethiopia. She was briefed on the genesis of the problem, the challenge in the northern part of Ethiopia. Particularly, she was briefed on the fact that there has been a reform process going on in Ethiopia, which everybody is aware of. That reform process has been all-rounded. It was political, economic, cultural, social, and diplomatic as well. Though the TPLF forces couldn't continue with the reform process, they boycotted and they left the process. The government, the federal government, has pleaded them to come back to the process. Elders, the religious figures, personalities of all sorts were sent to Tigray to persuade them to come back to the process, though they were not willing. At the end of the day, they stopped the Northern Command Force from the back. That triggered the conflict. The government was forced or pulled, or we can call it pushed into this process of law enforcement operations after so long patience. And
The spokesperson of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Ethiopia said Samantha has been briefed on the destructive effects of the TPLF that blocked humanitarian aid and caused new displacements on the people of Afar and Amhara.
she was briefed also about the unilateral humanitarian ceasefire, which the government has declared, though it was not reciprocated positively by the other side. She briefed her also on the fact that these forces have started invading the Amhara areas and the Tigray, the Afar areas as well, in violations of the ceasefire declared by the government in the interest of the people of Tigray. And still, she expressed to her the commitment of the government for the ceasefire. Though the other side is not willing, and they are into these situations. And it was a kind of active engagement. It was a kind of positive engagement by way of briefing the guest about what has happened here. And we hope and believe that she has got the right perspective of what is prevailing here. In fact, the guest also insisted on the need for the humanitarian, for boosting humanitarian relief, which he considers vital. And I think she made an opinion also of putting pressure on the other side also, because the other side should reciprocate the same way and to play a positive and constructive role in this process.
U.S. Agency for International Development, USAID Administrator Samantha Power said her government is concerned about the conflict in Tigray and the challenges of humanitarian assistance to the region, as well as the internally displaced people in Amhara and Afar regions as a result of TPLF's continued military movement, a spokesperson added.
Meanwhile, in a weekly press briefing, the spokesperson of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Ethiopia, Ambassador Dina Mufti, highlighted the ministry's major weekly political, economic and civic engagement events. Ambassador Dina said UN Resident and Humanitarian Coordinator Martin Griffiths met with Deputy Prime Minister and Foreign Minister Demeka Makona last week, and the two sides exchanged views on the current humanitarian situation in northern Ethiopia. The ambassador also said the Ethiopian Chamber of Commerce has signed an agreement with its Algerian counterpart to establish the Ethio-Algeria Joint Chamber of Commerce. This is believed to cement the bilateral ties of the two nations, as to the spokesperson.
Economic diplomacy, Ethiopian Chamber of Commerce signed an agreement with the Algerian counterparts on forming the Council of the Ethiopian Trade Associations. Ethiopian engineers groups also held virtual discussions with their counterparts in Algeria on the way to cooperate, to forge cooperations between them.
Dean also stated that the diaspora community has shown strong participation in the Renaissance Dam in the field of civic diplomacy.
Otherwise, Ethiopians living in various countries have kept have continued expressing solidarity with Ethiopia, especially with the Ethiopian National Defense Force. Others also have continued pledging money and diplomatic support for the GERD.
Although the Ethiopian polity has lived for thousands of years in unity and fraternity, there are erroneous comparisons being made with Yugoslavia and its breakup in the late 1980s. A member of the British House of Lords, Arminka Halij, conceived about Ethiopia's current situation in comparison with Yugoslavia's political fallout. Ethiopia's quick reaction to his miscalculated comparison clearly stated that Ethiopia is not Yugoslavia, recalling the long history and strong social bond of Ethiopians. Alula Teklamaram takes a deeper look into the issue.
In the 20th century, there existed a country in southeastern Europe called Yugoslavia. Today, however, what used to be Yugoslavia is now 6 fully independent countries, plus one more self-declared independent country, but more on that later.
Arminka Halij is a member of the British House of Lords and served as a special advisor to Foreign Secretary William Hague from 2010 to 2014. He recently wrote about Ethiopia's current situation in comparison with Yugoslavia's political fallout, citing Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed's remark against the TPLF clique. Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed recently said that his country is facing an enemy, which is a cancer for Ethiopia. Halij translated this term as dehumanizing, immediately associating it to similar languages which were a prelude to ethnic cleansing and genocide in Yugoslavia. Paralleling with Yugoslavia, he expressed his fear for the people of Ethiopia.
Ethiopia is a unique state in the African context. It has existed in a coherent form for more than 2 millennia, fighting off numerous foreign invasions.
Ethiopia's quick reaction to his miscalculated comparison clearly stated that Ethiopia is not Yugoslavia, recalling the long history and a strong social bond of Ethiopians. In an attempt to draw a parallel with Yugoslavia, the author has failed to understand the socio-political, historical and cultural context of the country and its people. To begin with, Ethiopia and its people are known for their cultural and religious tolerance and have lived in harmony for many centuries. There exists no enmity among the people of Ethiopia. Therefore, comparing the country's current situation with the Balkans is a complete malposition. But he argued that like Ethiopia today, Yugoslavia was a large multi-ethnic state with a recent history of dictatorship, going through a period of political change. Attempts to turn Yugoslavia into a greater Serbia and some of it into a greater Croatia by force failed, but only after 4 years of war, genocide, and the disintegration of the country. 30 years on, he says, looking at Ethiopia in fear that history could repeat itself. Ethiopian ambassador to Brussels, Hirut Zemene, became the first Ethiopian diplomat to respond to such analysis, saying it was both factually and conceptually incorrect. Additionally, without properly understanding the nouns of the official Ethiopian language or statements made by the Prime Minister with regard to the TPLF, the author has misinterpreted a label aimed at the TPLF as describing the compatriots in Tigray. Helik attempts to call for unwarranted interventions from the international community based on misinformed ideas. The Ethiopian ambassador made it clear that no Ethiopian official has incited ill intentions against their own people as the piece portrayed. Back then, in Yugoslavia, it all began slowly, but deliberately. Politicians whipped up nationalism to drive their cares and embraced war and genocide to protect their people, the ultimate expression of that nationalism, according to him. The machinery of a federal Yugoslav state was turned against a section of the population who were deemed wrong, and the armed forces were used to kill the very people they were meant to protect. Fighting began in one region and spread to others. Atrocities fueled further atrocities. The international community, initially silent, eventually stepped in and froze the war, but only after they had proved at best incapable, at worst actively harmful throughout the preceding 4 years. Yugoslavia disintegrated into 5 nations. Today, after further conflict, the region is made up of 7 nations and it is still riven by tensions and nationalist aspirations. In his comparison with the beginning of Yugoslavia's political fallout, Helik underscored the 9-month-long fighting, displacement, and humanitarian crisis in Tigray is similar with that of Yugoslavia. Throughout the past 3 years, no government statement that referred to TPLF has failed to underscore the difference between TPLF and the people of Tigray. Yet, the miserably ill-informed member of the British House of Lords shamelessly twisted the PM's remark and stated the following. Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed drew a chilling distinction between Tigrayan Ethiopians and others in the country, describing the children of Ethiopia as wheat and his Tigrayan opponents as invasive weeds who must be uprooted in a manner that will never grow again. More likely, Helik knew nothing about Abiy's FB post until the intentionally mistranslated version was given to him by a TPLF hireling with a request to pen a piece that would put Ethiopia and its PM in a bad spot. This is clear evidence how underhandedly the West has handled the essence and the factors of the war in Tigray over the last 9 months. Foreigners writing terrible piece on a subject matter of or a country they know very little about is very common. Ethiopians have witnessed tons of them in the last 9 months. However, this piece turns out in that it is a piece written on the basis of one deliberately mistranslated statement made by a foreign dignitary. More importantly, the political, economic, and ethnic conditions that led to the breakup of Yugoslavia are very different from the situation in Ethiopia today. In fact, one can say what Ethiopia is going through today is the direct opposite of what Yugoslavia went through, beginning the early 1990s, leading up to its ultimate breakup into many states. In Yugoslavia, the inter-ethnic conflict was precipitated by one ethnic group, Serbia, taking up a disproportionate political and decision-making power. This was resented by the Kurds and Slovens, who declared independence in 1991. The wars that ensued were the result of the Serbs-dominated federal government trying to keep the federation alive and when this failed, the subsequent attempt to create Greater Serbia. In Ethiopia, scarce TPLF ruled the country for 27 years, dominating all political, economic, and military power. What then happened in 2018 was a direct opposite of what happened in Yugoslavia. In 1991, in Yugoslavia, the disenfranchised group decided to leave the federation. In Ethiopia, such groups formed a front and dislodged the divider. In Yugoslavia, the politically dominant group on the eve of the federation's breakup, the Serbia Communist Party, attempted to keep the federation alive, while in Ethiopia, TPLF recoiled to its base, Tigray province, and earnestly started working on dismantling the country. The author's view of the TPLF's destabilizing character, expanding the conflict to neighboring provinces, demonstrated only an attempt to justify the acts of the TPLF as legitimate, and even more so unjustifiably impose sanctions on Ethiopia. Ethiopia thus not only rejected this enormous opinion, but would also request that, as a respected official of a reputed country, the author refrain from comparing incomparable situations and calling for unwarranted action.
አባቶቻችን የተረከብንሽ እናት ሀገራችን የምንወድሽ ለጅብ ይሁን እንጂ ለአሞራ ስጋችን አንቺ አትደፈሪም ይፈሳል ደማችን ተከብረሽ ኑርሺው በአባቶቻችን ደም በአባቶቻችን ደም እናት ኢትዮጵያ የደፈረሽው ደም የደፈረሽው ደም አንድ ላይ ተከብረሽ ኑርሺው በአባቶቻችን ደም በአባቶቻችን ደም እናት ኢትዮጵያ የደፈረሽው ደም የደፈረሽው ደም ተከብረሽ ኑርሺው በአባቶቻችን ደም በአባቶቻችን ደም በአባቶቻችን ደም እናት ኢትዮጵያ የደፈረሽው ደም የደፈረሽው ደም
At the very end, I saw a statue about when they celebrated their 100th anniversary or something like that. And walked. The river has two sides. One side is like painted the regional flag, and then on that side is like an Ethiopian flag. So we walked over to that side to just see, you know. And then after that, we just went to the middle of the town.
Kamna bona bela, mangon jinina sukara, jinina tola karan.
Crocodiles, and I could be eaten. So I can't go near water or near any ponds because I'll get eaten. And as you can see over there, you can see kids swimming, but apparently they know the signs of when a crocodile's coming, and I don't, so I'm not allowed to swim. Kind of harsh, but you know, what can you do?
Welcome back. You're watching Addis News Hour. Seasoned journalist Mogus Teklemaram, who passed away on August 2, is being laid to rest yesterday in the presence of friends, family, and admirers. Famous for his diligence and industriousness, the deceased has greatly contributed to the formation of the English department at the national Ethiopian television ETV. Goshmaliso reports.
Mogus Tekle Mikael was born in 1935 from his father Tekle Mikael Tamanu and mother Amatazyon Tekle Haymanot in Tigray region. He attended basic adult education in Adwa Nigsta Saba School. Then he came to Addis Ababa and attended his primary education at Ntoto Makana Jesus School and his high school at the then Kotabi Haile Selassie First School with high score. Joining the former Haile Selassie University or the current Addis Ababa University, Mogus also got his first degree in political science and international relationship. Upon his keen interest for education, Mogus then went to the United States, earning a master's degree in journalism from Columbia University in 1964. He started his first duty at the then Ministry of Information, where he contributed greatly to the establishment of the English department at the Ethiopian television. The late Mogus then served as director, chief editor and head of press agency at Ethiopian television and radio, as it was called then. He also served in various government positions diligently and industriously, assuming various responsibilities at the Foreign Affairs Ministry and Policy Institute and Research. The late Mogus has been laid to rest Thursday in the presence of friends, family and admirers at Addis Ababa Kamikael Church. At the funeral event, his family told ETV how loyal, kind and humble he used to be.
My father was one of those modern guys that loved his country so dearly. Even after he went to Columbia to study journalism, first and foremost, what he wanted to do was bring that education and that knowledge and that experience to this country, and to continue on the legacy of our forefathers and getting Ethiopia to be on the map. At a bigger scale. He was a very quiet man, loving man, wanted peace for everybody. He was a great man. He was indescribably great man.
He was training diplomats, giving acquaintance to the diplomats that Ethiopia how diplomatically can defend itself. He was so always concerned with the foreign policy. Up to his days, he was living here. That's all. Mogus was a special, my brother. Mogus was a special person. We're all sorry. We are all sorry, I say. And I particularly am touched with Mogus, was because he was my brother, not only my brother, but he was my father. Because he's the one who made this whole society. So for Ethiopia, he was an indispensable person. Anyway, death has snatched him from us.
Mogus passed away on August 2, 2021 at the age of 86 after receiving medical treatments in the country. He is now survived by his son and 3 daughters.
Ethiopia and Djibouti reaffirm commitments for seamless transportation of wheat to northern parts of Ethiopia. Ethiopian ambassador to Djibouti, Birhanu Tsegaye, paid a visit to Dole multi-purpose port of Djibouti and conferred with the port's deputy chief operating officer, Mr. Idris Doho, earlier on Thursday. During the visit, Mr. Idris noted that the port professed the utmost care to avoid any hiccups during dispatch of wheat being transported by the World Food Programme to the northern part of the country. The ambassador, along with diplomats and deputy chief operating officer of the port, have witnessed trucks loading with wheat that was stored in the silo warehouse. The ambassador has also spoken to the truck drivers at the port and received confirmations that they had encountered no problems and were receiving efficient service.
main boulevard here, Liberation Avenue.
We are in the main avenue, the Haranet Avenue. We are in front of the cathedral that was built in the 1930s. Also this avenue in the old days, back in the 50s, it had more traffic lights than Rome.
Super old Italian cars everywhere on the roads. So we are hitching a ride in a 1963 Fiat? Is it a Fiat?
No, Renault.
Renault. What do you like so much about Atrium? And even many of the people here, especially the older generation, can speak and understand Italian fluently.
La macchina che va dappertutto. A car that goes anywhere.
This car?
Yeah, this car.
That's awesome.
This is Addis News Hour, and finally,